Welcome to the voiceover PowerPoint on pleasure, hedonism, and happiness as part of your positive psychology course. This will add some depth and some breadth to what's contained in Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 of your text. Enjoy your thoughts for the day and the song that goes with them.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Well, give me all you got and don't hold it back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Hey, go. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. Your love is too high. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. I said, bring me down, can't none bring me down. Come on.
So, routes to happiness. In life, we pursue happiness. In science, we hopefully can measure things that lead to happiness. So we look at positive emotion, uh, which leads us to the pleasant life, uh, gratifications, which lead us to the good life, and then something larger than self, meaning, that lead to the meaningful life. And so if you look at that, it's pleasure, it's engagement, and it's meaning. Those are the things that add up to a meaningful life. Keep in mind, I've said this before, they're all positive. One's not better than the other. They build off of each other. You can't get to a meaningful life if you don't know how to engage and have the good life and uh, and know what pleasure is. When you look at these, you get the pleasure, engagement, and meaning. And so we've learned that these can be helped and we can reach these through our positive emotions. We studied that with uh, Barbara Fredrickson's uh, broaden and build theory. So that's a key element to this positive emotions. So what makes something pleasurable? A lot of people look at pleasure as just something being quiet, mellow, serene, calm. In advertisements, they generally show a beach. Usually it's an isolated beach, so there's nobody there to bother you. And those are all pleasurable concepts. There is pleasure, however, though, in intense things. Joy can be very intense. Ecstasy is intense. So next, there's a clip from the movie Harry and Sally, uh, and Sally shows what pleasure can feel like.
I mean, how do I know I know?
Because they...
Yes, because they...
How do you know that they're really...
What are you saying? That they fake orgasm?
It's possible.
Get out of here.
Why? Most women at one time or another have faked it.
Well, they haven't faked it with me.
How do you know?
Because I know.
Oh. Right. That's right. I forgot. You're a man.
What is that supposed to mean?
Nothing. It's just that all men are sure it never happened to them, and most women at one time or another have done it, so you do the math.
You don't think that I can tell a difference?
No.
Get out of here.
Oh. Ooh.
Are you okay?
Oh. Oh, God. Ooh. Oh, God. Oh. 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 Oh, God. Oh, yeah, right there. Oh. 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 Oh, God. Oh. Yes. 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 Oh. Oh, yes. 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 Oh. Yes. 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 Oh. 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 Oh, God. Oh.
I'll have what she's having.
So we have this continuum when we look at pleasure. We've got very low amounts of pleasure. The absence of pleasure can lead to pain, and then pleasure's on the other end of that. And you have different ways that people address and accept pleasure. You have ascetics, and the image up at the top left there. You usually see this in like Indian, Hindu religions. The Buddha was an ascetic for a while. Where they live on just barely anything. They don't want to have any real pleasure in life. For some reason, they think that makes them closer to God. That's no different than Stoics. Stoics, first of all, don't complain about anything. And then, but very many of your religious orders, especially like monks, can be stoic. They may take a vow of silence. They may take some other type vow. Some groups like Opus Dei, even beat themselves and then offer that suffering up to make themselves holier. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the hedonists, and the hedonists, again, we talked about before, are, if it feels good, do it. That's what it's all about. It's all about pleasure. It's not about anything painful we want to avoid. Epicureans are your people that are connoisseurs. They're the people that have to have the finest wine, the extra virgin olive oil, all of the different things that are just the best of the best. An Epicurean is, as is expressed in the little cartoon in the center. Now, the inability to feel pleasure is called anhedonic. An being away, hedonic means the pleasure. And then, and a lot of times this can happen to people after head injuries. They don't have the ability to feel pleasure. Some of them don't have the ability to feel pain either. And then, of course, the opposite of pleasure is pain. And so a little true-false question, there can be no pleasure in pain. You would think that's true, but then you probably haven't read or seen the movies 50 Shades of Grey or are into any kind of sadomasochistic sex. There's also the memory of pleasure. And Kahneman's theory says our memory of pleasure is not really a faithful recollection. And you'll be watching a video for this in next week's videos. But Kahneman's theory is called peak end theory, so that we kind of remember how things start. We remember the high times and lows as intense, and then again the lasting feeling from the end. But we don't remember all the stuff in between. And then there's the anticipation of pleasure. Just the idea that you're getting ready to go meet your lover, to have a great meal, to take a great sip of wine or sip of a great wine or something like that. But anyway, you go into a movie that you really want to see or a concert. There's that anticipation of pleasure, and that's referred to as the endowment effect. You're expecting it. Okay, if your expectations are too high, then the event doesn't live up to the expectations and or your anticipation, and you don't find the pleasure in it that you might have found if you didn't have such high expectations. That makes sense? One way we can take advantage of that broaden and build theory and broaden our positive emotions is through savoring. You're going to have an exercise to do with savoring, and you're going to have to really be present with a part of a meal or an event that you're attending. It's going to be an exercise where you really focus on savoring. Those of you who may have read the Way of the Peaceful Warrior, it's a great little book, and it gives some insight into how to really savor a meal. So as part of the role of happiness, if we look at what is referred to as the hedonic treadmill, we have a set range, a set point, so to speak. It's kind of like a happiness thermostat. It's like the thermostat on your wall. If you want the temperature to be 72 degrees, it would go up to 74 before it would kick on the air conditioner, or it would go down to 68 before it would kick on the heat. So it's not a one-to-one thing, because we accommodate. We humans accommodate to situations. We adapt. We have a tendency to get over our happiness, and so then we want more. We want another hit of happiness. So we have this set range that we deal with. When you look at the hedonic treadmill and this set point or set range, we get into that a little deeper when we look at consumerism. We often refer to people as shopaholics. They've got to buy things, because they feel better when they buy things. And then whether it's something new or something that's old that we want, but how long does that feeling last? And that's when people start suffering from what's referred to quite often as affluenza. And that's the disease of trying to keep up with the Joneses, do what other people have, get what they have. Another area is that we adapt, as I said before, we accommodate to good things happening to us, and even bad things. in 2 to 3 months. Major events lose their impact on our happiness, whether it's being fired or being promoted. we swing back to that point on our thermostat. Wealth. Money doesn't buy happiness. Wealth has a low correlation with happiness. The rich are only slightly happier than the poor, and the poor are not happy once they reach a certain level of where they can get what they need. Studies have been done that show 5 years after winning the lottery, the winners are no more happy than they were beforehand, and a lot of times they're not as happy because now they've got all these other problems that they never had before. Another interesting part to this is when bad happens, you take look at the picture of the gentleman in the bottom corner, of the left corner, has been paralyzed from the waist down, and you'd think, oh my God, he'll never be happy. That's awful. You'll never overcome that. And he says he's happier now than he's ever been because he now appreciates everything in life that he can do. So when you look at affluenza, and some of that has to do with somatic pleasure, that is pleasure that you feel physically or physiologically. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to get you to do when you're doing your feelization, when you're trying to get that felt sense of an emotion in your body. So looking at that somatic pleasure. But what happens if you try to take a shortcut to happiness? And that's what you get when you go shopaholic, when you're just gonna go have a drink or two or 10 to drown your sorrows, zoning out on the TV. These are all shortcuts to feeling good, and there's a cost to that. When they become your principal road to happiness, can lead to addictions. And we're studying this in my addictions course, especially in the behavioral addictions. The number of people that get addicted to the likes they receive on Facebook or these other apps keeps them coming back. And after a while, they've got to have more likes. They've got to do things to get more likes because that gives them a little shot of the endorphins. So some more information about the hedonic treadmill is that our real income has gone up dramatically over the past 50 years in this country. However, our life satisfaction has remained flat. Physical attractiveness, like wealth, it certainly has its advantages. People have a tendency off the bat to trust you more, to do things for you if you're physically attractive. But it has little effect on your happiness. In fact, it can work against you because people that are very attractive think that oftentimes people are only being nice to them because they're good looking. So you take somebody like Lindsay Lohan. I mean, she's just had one episode after another of drug problems and so forth. And then speaking of physical health, which is probably our most valuable resource, our physical health we take for granted. We don't think about our health until we're sick or something goes wrong. So physical health is barely correlated with happiness. So what keeps us on this hedonic treadmill? Well, part of it is genetics. Optimism and pessimism are innate, and so they have a direct bearing on our happiness or our present happiness. Just like being an extrovert or an introvert is innate, is nature. Optimism and pessimism are innate, and then And then again, that set range, we accommodate, we adapt to what's going on around us. We level out. That being said, overall, we're pretty happy. Okay, if you look at this graph up here, uh, age and our happiness index. When we're teens, our happiness starts dipping a little bit. And in our mid 40s up to 50s, those are our peak earning years, but they're also the least happy years according to this scale. And then as we get older, we generally are pretty satisfied with our lives. We get happier. Now, the thing to keep in mind is while this graph looks awful, is it's only a 1 point difference between the 7.5 and 8.5. So we're not talking about a lot. We're talking about a 7 to an 8 on a 10-point scale. So overall, we're pretty happy with our lives. I just want to throw in a reminder to those of you who may be pessimists, again, that there's nothing wrong with being pessimistic. Okay, it's just your lens of looking at things. So Todd Kashdan, who's up at JMU, and Robert Biswas-Diener wrote a book called The Upside of Your Dark Side. Both of them are engaged heavily in positive psychology, but this is a look at how our pessimism can be very valuable to us. So if you find that you are a pessimist, this book would probably be very well worth your reading. So we've talked about pleasure, and pleasure not necessarily leading to happiness. What exactly is happiness? So happiness comes from the Icelandic word hap, which is luck or chance. Haphazard, happenstance, it's the same derivation. And Common Dictionary says it's feeling or showing pleasure or contentment. So there's got to be an experience of the pleasure. And then some everyday synonyms are subjective well-being, life satisfaction, and so forth. So in the Declaration of Independence, happiness is absolutely mentioned. As the highlighted piece from Thomas Jefferson says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and you can put in parentheses, and women are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, Benjamin Franklin said the Constitution only gives people the right to pursue happiness. You have to catch it yourself. I talked about Plato and his 4 levels of happiness earlier and comparing those to Seligman's 3 levels. And another thing that impacts our happiness is what Plato described as ideal forms. And in looking at ideal forms, he notes that we are perfection seekers. We look for perfection, so we notice flaws. So when you take a building like the Parthenon, this is the replica of the Parthenon in my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee. And the thing about the Parthenon aesthetically was that the columns that hold it up, if you get down next to them, they kind of bow out in the middle. They're bigger in the middle than they are at the top and the bottom. And what that does is it lets the Parthenon look the same. It keeps the perspective the same regardless of what angle you look at it from. It's really quite ingenious. But we notice mistakes, as you can see below. To give you an example of us being perfection seekers, you look at this Calvin Klein ad, print ad, and the woman in it is clearly a beautiful woman. But what do your eyes get drawn to? Most people kind of look at her, take her in, and then they notice the gap in her front teeth. Another thing that we need to reconcile is this concept that we do things to have things and then we'll be happy. In other words, we do things, we go to school to get a job, to work hard, to have a house with a picket fence and 3 kids or whatever. And when we get all of that, we'll be happy. And that doesn't necessarily work. What you need to do, and I think I've mentioned this before, is you want to be first. Be the person you want to be, okay? Then do what you need to do to have the things that you want. But if you put the be first, then you're going to be happy now, okay? So make it be, do, have, as opposed to do, have, be. One of the things that we have to achieve in order to enhance our well-being or our happiness is some type of balance in life. We can't just goof off all the time. We won't be able to pay the rent. I love this quote by Louise Suggs, one of the early women golfers and co-founder of the LPGA. She said, golf, and then by extension life, is like a love affair. If you don't take it seriously, it's not fun. If you do, it breaks your heart. Don't break your heart, but flirt with the possibility. So have enough fun in your life to make it worthwhile. So I'm going to broaden your vocabulary again. We're going to talk about eudaimonia. Okay, the eudaimonic view is a view of happiness. Characteristics are to be authentic and live according to your real needs and your desired goals. And it embraces flourishing. Thriving and flourishing is part of what makes positive psychology positive psychology. So be authentic, be genuine, be real, be yourself. Authentic and eudaimonic. So you can dazzle your friends at some point when they ask you what you're doing, and rather you say, instead of saying I'm being real, you can say I'm being eudaimonic. So we started off this section asking, what is happiness? And this cartoon tells you that everybody thinks that happiness at least sells. And so following this are some short video clips. Those are advertisements that give you an idea of happiness. And if they don't make you laugh, they should at least make you smile.
Well, everything is in its place, and I can't stop the smile on my face, 'cause I'm happy in this place. And all of my friends are in this place, and I can't stop the smile on my face, 'cause I'm happier in this place. 1, 2, 3, so smile, smile all my friends. You're in a happy place, so smile, smile all my friends. Come on, smile, smile all my friends. You're in a happy place, so smile, smile all my friends. Come on, smile, smile all my friends. You're in a happy place, so smile, smile all my friends. 1, 2, ready, go.
Just as a reminder, happiness is not all that positive psychology is about. These cover on Time magazine, The Science of Happiness, was one of the reasons that they rebranded positive psychology and started calling it the psychology of well-being, because happiness had so many issues, and people would say, well, you don't need to tell me how to be happy. I know how to be happy, and so forth. But there is science behind what we do in positive psychology. I'm going to give you some basic examples of how the early science in positive psychology came about. And note that the one of the concepts that Seligman had was he wanted to build a bridge of science between cognitive psychology and humanistic psychology, because the humanistic psychology got taken over by self-help gurus, positive thinking movement, and so forth, that while a lot of it is accurate and works, there's limits to it, and people don't. There's not much science behind it to show that it works. So one of the early studies wanted to look at the correlation between looking at pictures in a yearbook in a high school or college. I think this is the high school yearbook, and look at the correlation of personality, marital status, and health outcomes 20 years later. And so they found that the people that were showing a Duchenne smile, a quote unquote real smile, had a very positive personality, had successful marriages, and had better outcomes, health outcomes, than the people who had the fake smiles or the posed smiles. Now, of course, there's a lot of problems with this study, but it's a good starting point. I mean, some of the problems are, maybe somebody had a bad day, maybe they were ill, and so forth. So, it gives you a starting point. This is the idea behind research. So, what about this guy? Did he have do you think he had is that a Duchenne smile? Does he have a good future? Yeah, and there he is with a real smile. He's got his cup of coffee, so that's why. So one of the early studies wanted to look at the correlation between looking at pictures in a yearbook in a high school or college. I think this is the high school yearbook, and look at the correlation of personality, marital status, and health outcomes 20 years later. And so they found that the people that were showing a Duchenne smile, a quote unquote real smile, had a very positive personality, had successful marriages, and had better outcomes, health outcomes, than the people who had the fake smiles or the posed smiles. Now, of course, there's a lot of problems with this study, but it's a good starting point. I mean, some of the problems are, maybe somebody had a bad day, maybe they were ill, and so forth. So, it gives you a starting point. This is the idea behind research. So, what about this guy? Did he have do you think he had is that a Duchenne smile? Does he have a good future? Yeah, and there he is with a real smile. He's got his cup of coffee, so that's why. Let's take a look for a minute at the presidential candidates. On the left, you've got a lot of the Democratic candidates. Let's take a look at their smiles. So, generally speaking, on the left picture is a posed picture. The right picture is more of a candid shot that shows them really smiling. Now, the bottom left, I've only got one picture of Bernie Sanders because with Bernie, he's either really, truly smiling and laughing, or he's angry and yelling at you. So I couldn't find two pictures of him. But you've got Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, and Amy Klobuchar. And then on the right, you've got Donald Trump, and the top picture is a posed picture. The bottom one is maybe his real smile. I don't know. It's hard to figure. But anyway, you get a little idea of what they really look like and what you can look for when you can tell whether somebody's being truthful, accurate, and really happy, so to speak. And then, of course, there's my favorite, this guy, Barack Obama. When he smiled, he generally meant it and was genuinely happy when he smiled. So you guys know by now that I like application, and smiling elevates your mood. If you're in a bad mood, you can put a pencil in your mouth and force a smile. And what actually happens is if you push it back in there and force that Duchenne smile mechanism, it will actually enhance your mood. So the next time you're in a bad mood, uh, think about the pencil in the mouth technique. There are more routes to happiness. The main one for most of us in a day-to-day uh, atmosphere is engagement. If you get engaged in something and you can get into flow, as Csikszentmihalyi describes it, uh, you are very happy, very content if you're in flow. Uh, and Seligman says victory uh, helps us be happy. It's winning at whatever matters most to us. And that can be literally in a sport and a game, metaphorically in work and love. And part of that can also be just doing the best you know you did. All of these things are uh, laid out in both of my books, Develop the Winner's Mentality and the 13th Step, Thriving in Recovery, should you be interested. We've talked about doing surveys, about looking at pictures and then doing interviews. These are all ways that people can measure happiness, self-report surveys. And then there's ESM, Experience Sampling Method. Csikszentmihalyi started this back in the 80s when he had students wearing beepers. Some of you may not know what beepers are unless you watch older movies. It's a pager or a beeper is a little device you wear on your belt. And if somebody called your number, then it would buzz or vibrate, and you'd look down at it, and it would have the number that you needed to call. So you'd go find a telephone somewhere because people didn't have portable or personal phones at the time, and then call the number. But what he would do is have them uh, he would page them at different times during the day, and when they got the page, then they would record how they were feeling. Todd Cashton up at GMU has taken this to, with the advancement of the technology, he's added smartphones to it where they can actually fill in information on whatever it is that he's studying. So he does a lot of his research using ESM. So the research does show that most people, the majority of people, are rather happy. That goes along with that little graph I showed you earlier about age and happiness. But most people are relatively happy. So in closing, for us on a regular basis, the easiest routes to happiness are to be present and to be in gratitude. And the easiest route to be present is to be in gratitude. Count your blessings. Savor the sunset or the flower or just the view that you might happen to be looking at, or your station in life, where you are. But enjoy. Consciously pay attention to enjoy your life. It's the only one you get, at least that we can recognize. So enjoy yourself, and I'll be connecting with you in another voiceover soon.